Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to all those of you who are being admitted from the waiting room. This is Jennifer Wieland with Nelson Nygaard. I am a member of the consultant team supporting SDOT on the Ballard Interbay Regional Transportation Study. And we are getting everybody squared away here. We've got about 30 folks who are coming in from the waiting room. And just so you all know, as you are coming in, this is being recorded. We will be posting this on the project website shortly. So just hang tight for a second or two and we will get started here. We just want to make sure that we give people a chance to join us and get situated. And we'll give everybody a quick overview of Zoom as we get going as well. You all are coming in muted and largely with video off, although some folks may be able to turn video on. You're largely going to stay muted throughout the early part of the meeting until we move into Q&A, and we'll talk more about how that looks. But we'll also orient folks to the chat and get you all situated so that you can actively participate in several different ways. So let's hold tight for just a second, and then I will officially kick us off. And welcome to the additional folks who have come in. This is Jennifer Wieland with Nelson Nygaard. We're just getting everybody admitted from the waiting room, and we will officially launch here in just a second. Great, it looks like we've got a good crew of folks showing up. We've got about 30 some attendees and a handful of staff as well. So we'll give people just one more minute as we get ready to get started. All right. Jerry, how are we looking in terms of, we've got everybody in from the waiting room?
Yes, we do. And we're at about 36 participants now, almost half of who has registered.
All right. Well, we are at 12:04. And I think as long as we're not having folks who are trying to come in through the waiting room, Diane, are you okay if I go ahead and officially get us started?
Let's get started.
All right. Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Again, this is Jennifer Wieland with Nelson Nygaard. I am part of the consultant team for the Ballard Interbay Regional Transportation Study, supporting the City of Seattle and the Seattle Department of Transportation. As we get started today, I am going to run us through the agenda, get us oriented to some of the tools and features that we'll use in Zoom, and give you a quick introduction to the project team. And then we've got a short poll to make sure we have a sense of who's on the line today as we get going. It looks like everybody has joined us through the web link as opposed to by phone, which is great. So you'll all have pretty similar functionality, I think. But we'll do our best to get everybody situated and make sure you can all participate fully as we go through our conversation. So I am going to start by sharing my screen and just giving us kind of a quick look at a few basics here. And as we continue to have a few additional folks join us, I do just want to note for everyone that we are recording this presentation. This will be posted to the project website just as soon as we are done and able to get that live today. So please do know that you are all being recorded, and I'm just getting all of my functionalities up here. So again, thank you all for joining us. This is the first of 2 virtual public meetings for the BIRT study based on where we are at this point in the project. And these are going to be the same content both times. What we are going to do through these 2 presentations is a couple of things. So we'll get everybody situated. We're going to do a quick welcome activity, and then we're going to try and keep our project team presentation to just about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit less. We're going to very quickly just orient everyone to some of the recent work that has been done, but the core focus of the presentation today is going to be on this third bullet of preliminary projects by mode. We'll introduce you to the goals that we have been using to start evaluating these projects, but really want to be able to share with you some of what we have begun to suss out in terms of where we may head with project recommendations. Again, this is early. We're not at the phase of making recommendations yet. This is really the perfect point to be getting some input and feedback from all of you on what we're going to share today. We're going to try and hold about 30 minutes for Q&A, and we'll talk about how that will work as we move in, and then we'll just make sure to close out with next steps and other ways to stay involved. So that's what we have got planned as we move into the presentation. Zoom, I would imagine, is a platform that many of you have been on, whether it is for a happy hour with friends and family or an opportunity to connect with colleagues. But I'll give you just a quick look at a few of the key features that we will need as we move through today. So as I mentioned, you are entering this meeting largely muted and most likely without your video on. You do have the ability to turn your video on. We're going to keep everybody on mute until we move further into the presentation, just so we can minimize background noise. If you click on the Participants tab, which is the little people that will have some numbers by it, you will be able to see the list of everybody who is in the meeting, and you also have the ability to change your name. So if you entered the meeting and your name is not showing up the way that you'd like, you can just hover over your name and be able to make that change. As we move through the presentation part of the agenda, we're going to ask you to use the chat feature for any questions that you have that come up as Diane and Tom are presenting, and I'll introduce them in just a second. That way we can just kind of keep the flow going. Because I'll be moving us through the slides, I'll do my best to be monitoring that and try and weave some of those questions into the presentation as we go. What we can't address during the Q&A, we will come back to, or I'm sorry, what we can't address during the presentation, we will come back to as we move into the Q&A. And then I'll also give you a few more details later about how we're going to manage the question and answer portion of this. So you'll see again here along the bottom, the Participants tab is one piece that will pop up. It'll pop up on the right of your screen, and then the chat window will pop up as well. Please do note that in chat, you have the ability to send a message to everyone who's in the meeting, or you can send messages privately. Just be cognizant of who you are trying to send to, and please do know that messages that are sent to everyone become part of the public record for this meeting. So as we get started this morning, I do want to take a quick second and just mention who from the project team is here. And then we're going to do a quick poll to get a sense of who is on the line. So again, I am Jennifer. I am joined by Tom Brennan from Nelson Nygaard, who is the consultant team project manager, and Jerry Stroop from Nelson Nygaard. Our SDOT colleagues are Diane Wyatter, who's the project manager, and Chisaki and Andres, who are core parts of the project team. And then we also have Kendra Brayland from Fair and Peers, who is a part of our technical team supporting this work. So you'll hear from Diane and Tom as we move through the presentation, and certainly all of these folks are here as references. So we wanted to get a sense of who's on the line with us today, and also just let you all know that we have been able to hear from a lot of folks already as we have launched our survey. We've had about 190 responses to the online survey, and that just launched at the end of last week. So thanks to all of you that have been providing input in that way. We're hearing from a great mix of folks, people who walk, drive, take transit, bike, and drive freight in the neighborhood, and a really good mix of how people are hearing about things. About 70% of the respondents so far have been residents of the study area. So the way that we're going to just kind of quickly ask you all to tell us who you are and who is here, we've got a little poll that is going to pop up on your screen. For those of you who are connected by phone, apologies, you're not going to see this. but we will work you into our conversation as we go. So we've got 3 quick questions for everyone. And hopefully you see this at the front of your screen. The first is, we're curious to know if this is the first meeting that you're attending related to this project, or if you are a longtime BIRT aficionado. Our second question is that we're curious to hear about your relationship to the study area. Are you a resident of one of the neighborhoods that's represented in the study area? Are you a business owner, an employee, or a visitor? And pardon me, and then our third question is, we're just curious to know about your primary reason for joining us today in terms of what you hope to get out of the event, whether that is learning about the study, sharing some feedback, asking a question, or providing comment about a specific project. So I'm going to give folks just another quick second here while I mute myself and cough, if I can find my mute button. Okay, 1 second. Thank you, Jerry, or whoever did that for me. All right, it looks like we've got responses from most folks, and so just to keep us going, I am going to go ahead and end the poll and share our results. So it looks like we've got about 50-50 in terms of folks who have attended a meeting related to this project before and those who are new. So welcome to both of you. It's great to have both those who have been following along from the beginning as well as some new voices. It looks like we've got a good number of folks who are residents of the neighborhoods. So about 21 of 30 who responded are residents of either Ballard, Magnolia, or Interbay. Oh, and I'm sorry, more than that even, 23 as we add in Queen Anne. We've got a handful of folks who are business owners and employees, and then some folks who visit the neighborhood as well. And then last but not least, in terms of folks' primary reason for joining us today, most folks are interested in learning about the study, and then some of you, it looks like, have some feedback ready to share, which is great. I would imagine that many of you will have more as we move through the conversation. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing these results, close that poll for us. And then I believe, Diane, has Councilmember Strauss joined us yet?
I am.
Or Jerry?
It doesn't look like it thus far.
Okay, great. Well, let's keep going and we will work him in as he is able to join. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Diane Whiter, who's the project manager from SDOT, to do just a quick review of the reason for this work and where we are today. So Diane, let me pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I want to acknowledge the entire project team for the Ballard Interbay Regional Transportation System project, both the SDOT staff as well as our consultants. We have been working hard over the past many months to make this project a reality. And I want to start by giving the background. So the Ballard Interbay Regional System project basically was initiated by the Washington State Legislature in 2019, and the legislation directs the scope of work for this project, and it's basically to, improve the mobility for people in freight in the area. We will be examining the replacement of the Ballard and Magnolia bridges, providing recommendations ultimately to the Seattle City Council, King County Council, and the Washington State Legislature by November 1st of this year. And I want you to know that there is also, we will be creating a timeline for constructing new Ballard and Magnolia bridges as part of this project. Next.
Well, now it just was so excited to move
It
forward.
just
There you go.
So, the study area is much of what you see on this map, but it's generally bound by Market Street to the north, Pier 91 and Expedia to the south, 10th Avenue West and 28th Avenue West. During our analysis for this project, we are looking out to the year 2042 in terms of transportation and the movement of people and goods. And the assumption is that both the Ballard and Magnolia bridges will have been replaced or rehabilitated by then. Next. So the project elements are what you see here. And we started this project in January. And we began by reviewing existing plans and previous studies. There were about 24 previous studies between 2010 and 2020 that we looked at, and so we have those summarized. We did a forecast and assessment of multimodal integration with our FAIR and Peers consultant team and Concord. We are here in July and August, and we are involved in basically a cost benefits analysis of both the social and economic impacts of both the Ballard and Magnolia bridges. We're going to be moving into September before we know it, where we'll have developed the bridge replacement timeline and a funding strategy. And I need to say at this point that the bridge replacement timeline and funding strategy is basically saying, if we started today to replace the bridges, what would it take to get there? So how much design time does it take? How much public outreach time does it take? How much environmental time does it take? Where do you find funding, both federal, state, and local perhaps in terms of a Move Seattle levy or other funding opportunities? So this is just conceptual. This is not going to get us to new bridges. And then we're going to package this all up into a report to the Washington State Legislature prior to November 1st and possibly do a report to them, well, not in person, but virtually in November. Next.
Diane, as we move on here, one of the questions that has come up that I'm sure is on everyone's minds is how this work relates to the focus on the West Seattle Bridge right now. Can you maybe just address that in terms of our work heading into the fall?
Right. Well, I'm sure folks are aware that the West Seattle Bridge has been closed for several months, and SDOT and the city have been working diligently at figuring out whether to repair or replace that bridge, how to develop a funding strategy, how to do traffic mitigation in the meantime, because there are 110,000 people who are affected by the closure of that bridge. So I would say at this moment in time, they are separate efforts, because what we are developing is a report with recommendations, excuse me, to our elected officials, whereas the West Seattle Bridge is a in real time project that the city is addressing.
Great, thanks, Diane.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the products that have been created and the deliverables that are complete, you can go to our website, which you see in the bottom middle of this slide, and you can review the document and plan review. I think it's around 70 pages, the methods and assumptions memorandum, the multimodal needs assessment, and coming soon to the website will be the social and economic baseline analysis. These are all of the products that will be informing our report, and they're quite detailed. They will serve as appendices more than the report itself. Next. We've been doing some stakeholder outreach and engagement. This is largely a technical study, and yet we want to hear what people think about our recommendations and their concerns about their neighborhoods and how they travel and how they get around and how they want to get around in the future. We have met with several of our elected officials and community organizations. The City of Seattle has modal advisory boards, bike board and freight board are the ones we've spoken to. Chisaki has helped create a worker survey down in Binmick. We've had some business interviews and meetings. We are working with Sound Transit on the West Seattle West Seattle Ballard Link Extension Project, and I have been involved in those surveys. We've talked to the bicycling and walking community from the neighborhood greenways, and we have also been in coordination with the Mayor's Maritime and Industrial Strategy Project. So we are very grateful that you are all here participating. We strongly encourage you all to go online, take the survey if you haven't, and make comments on our recommended projects. But we have this meeting, and we have a meeting next week on Thursday at 6:30. We also have an interagency team that is made up of the Washington State Department of Transportation, Sound Transit, King County Metro, the Port, and the Washington State Military. So they are also guiding projects and letting us know their interests in the area. And we will have a public review of the draft report for all of you in October.
Great. Thank you, Diane. Thanks for that quick review of what's been done and where we're headed next. Welcome to those new folks who have joined us. Just a quick note for everybody, this meeting is being recorded. Please do feel free to drop any questions during the presentation into the chat. Andres just added the link to the project website there for anybody who is interested and wants to take a look at some of those documents that Diane just mentioned. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tom Brennan from Nelson Nygaard, who is going to introduce the project goals, and then we'll move into talking about projects specifically. So Tom, go right ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer and Diane. Good afternoon, everyone. The BIRT study commenced earlier this year by setting some study goals for us to base our analysis on and doing a deep dive into user needs for the study area. The 4 goals that the project team developed are reflective of SDOT's core values and integrate a significant amount of input from the past studies reviewed in the study area and what we've heard from the community, neighborhoods, and businesses in the area. So I'll run through these quickly. There are also a set of evaluation criteria associated with each of these that we've used to get us to the draft project list that we'll be talking more about. I won't go through all of those in detail. Our first goal is to improve mobility for people in freight, and as you can see from Diane's earlier directive, this is coming straight from the legislative language for this project. A sample of one of the evaluation criteria we're looking at for individual projects is whether they reduce or help maintain travel time on key transportation corridors. Goal 2 is to provide a system that safely accommodates all travelers. So of course it's important that we protect our most vulnerable travelers, including people who are walking and biking. And so we're looking at where there's opportunity to minimize conflict between freight and auto uses and some of those vulnerable users. Goal 3 is that we advance projects that meet the needs of the communities of color and those of all incomes, ability, and ages within the study area. This is a critical goal area. I will mention as well that part of our criteria set is to look at climate impacts and how they affect study area users. And our final goal is that we support timely and coordinated implementation. And so a key criteria there is really looking at how individual projects respond to the most urgent structural needs, including the bridges in the study area. Again, as Diane mentioned, this builds on a lot of past work. There's been dozens of plans and studies done for this area. We've reviewed them all thoroughly. Many of the ideas that we're talking about come from those studies, which include the 2 bridge-specific studies that were conducted by SDOT recently, all the suite of modal plans that SDOT keeps and maintains, and a number of specific area plans like the Move Ballard plan or plans specific to individual facilities. It's also worth noting that there's a number of anticipated development or redevelopment projects that we are tied into, things like the Armory development, Terminal 91. Expedia campus has been partially completed at this point, Fisherman Terminal redevelopment, and as Diane mentioned, the Sound Transit West Seattle and Ballard Link Extension project. And we continue to take public comment and talk to key stakeholders throughout this process. Again, our work really is based on a deep dive that Farron Piers helped with in assessing our multimodal network needs. So we looked at needs across all these modal elements: pedestrian, bicycle, driving and freight, and transit, and identified a number of key project needs and some sort of higher level issues. And not surprisingly, this is an area that has a number of industrial uses, which is really part of the key importance of this district. The development of those industrial uses does often, though, contribute to challenging walking and cycling conditions. So we're looking at ways to help overcome some of those challenges. We know that the Ballard Bridge is a particularly tough connection for people walking and biking. That's obviously critical to this study. This is also an area that has a lot of trail network connectivity, but challenges traveling through the district. So again, we're looking at opportunities for completion of those systems. We know that access to transit is important and challenging sometimes today. That will become increasingly important with the development of the Sound Transit light rail stations in the area. We also know this is a really critical area for freight and goods delivery, and that reliability for those truck users is critical to this area. So those are just some of the key things that we're looking at as we think about potential projects that will be part of the BIRT multimodal system plan.
Great, thanks, Tom. As we head into the next piece, I do just want to quickly touch on a question that was asked, which is related to looking at needs around the Ballard locks and coordination with the Army Corps' Ship Canal Master Plan. And that has definitely been part of the work. You'll see that reflected as Tom moves into talking about some of the specific projects. But in addition to the Ballard Bridge being a core bike connection that came up, certainly the locks was another one. So we'll wrap that in as we start talking specifically about some of the projects moving forward.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. So again, BIRT is really focused on improving movement for goods and freight using a multimodal system of improvements. So while replacement of the Magnolia and Ballard Bridge is a core topic of this study, we are really looking at producing a coordinated set of phased improvements that address multimodal needs for all users throughout the district. And so as such, the project looks at bicycle and pedestrian needs and where there's gaps and opportunities to fill those. Safety for all modes. We're looking at transit from the standpoint of maintaining reliability, improving passenger amenities, and providing connections to core services, including future light rail. We're looking not only at spot improvements, but corridor level improvements as well. We know that as trucks move through the district, they're more concerned with how long it takes them to get from point to point versus maybe performance at a specific intersection. What that means for roadway design and safe movement of freight. We know our industrial and freight haulers want to move safely and protect pedestrians and bicycles as well. And then, of course, the bridge projects that really ground our work here. So we want to be clear at this point that no decisions have been made about bridge alternatives. There have been very complete planning studies prepared for both the Ballard and Magnolia Bridge that we're using as core inputs for our work in developing that timeline that Diane talked about. We have taken the two sort of highest prioritized alternatives from each of those studies as inputs to the scenarios that we're looking at within the course of this study. For the Ballard Bridge, that includes both the low and mid-height alternatives, for those of you that are familiar with that work. And then for the Magnolia Bridge, that includes both the in-kind or one-for-one replacement of the Magnolia Bridge and the alternative, which is the Armory Way alternative. For those of you familiar with that, it has several elements. A core element of that is a new Armory Way connection between 15th and Thorndike, and a new West Uplands perimeter roadway. So as we move into the potential projects, we're going to be talking about a wide range of multimodal projects here today. The team has evaluated over 80 projects, and again, looking at their ability to meet those core project goals and criteria that we talked about. After that first round of analysis, we're moving forward more than 40 projects. There's a lot for us to talk about. We won't be able to get into all projects in detail, but we want to hit some highlights and certainly encourage everybody to go to the website. We've got an interactive project map that shows each individual project. You can comment on it there. I know many of you have done that already. I believe Jerry is going to post to the chat function the web link to that in case people want to bring that up during the course of the meeting. I would stress that we have a range of small to quite large and substantial projects included. Some of our projects are dependent on one of the specific bridge alternatives. Just for example, we have a concept that includes freight and transit lanes on the Armory Way Bridge that is quite obviously associated with the Armory Way Bridge alternative and not the in-kind Magnolia Bridge replacement alternative. And again, the website makes that clear. We also want to note that some projects are in tension. We have concepts for different portions of roadway that probably couldn't both be implemented, but all have strong value. So one of the things we're really hoping for from this round of output is to get the community's perspective on some of those projects that may be in tension in terms of their implementation. So with that, why don't we move into our description of projects by mode, and we'll start with our pedestrian projects. Again, as I mentioned, historically industrial areas were really not developed often with pedestrians in mind, but with light rail coming and more diverse land use activity in these Ballard and Interbay neighborhoods, we know that there's a strong need today and in the future for safer pedestrian movement and a higher quality pedestrian experience. So our project list includes a number of sort of corridor long and site specific projects that improve sidewalks, that address lighting, ADA curb ramp needs, as well as bridge crossing improvements for major impediments such as arterials or the rail tracks. A couple of the core corridors where we propose sort of continuous improvements include 14th Ave Northwest in Ballard. That's a project we've seen a lot of support so far on the website for. Northwest Market Street, as well as the Elliott and 15th Ave West corridor. Those are all corridors where there's significant opportunities for sidewalk widening, pedestrian enhancements, better landscape buffer to protect people from moving traffic along the roadway, lighting, and curb ramps. We also have a few pedestrian bridge projects or crossing improvement projects. It's possible that these may not be all viable within the plan. We know ped bridges are quite expensive. But there are some major pedestrian impediments with the north-south rail tracks and 15th Ave West in this corridor. So a couple of those are identified north of Dravus, which include the West Emerson Street crossing and Bertona Street. And then another at Wheeler Street is associated with the Armory Way alternative, providing an additional connection to the Elliott Ave Trail. One example of a pedestrian improvement is one that I mentioned, which is the West Emerson Street overpass concept. Now, this is a location where we've heard a lot of comment including from the Magnolia Community Council, about the danger of school students and high school students crossing 15th Ave West here at an unmarked and rather dangerous location to move between bus routes as they're making trips.
Great. Tom, just as we are moving to the next, I'll just give you a second to take a breath and address a couple of quick questions that have come up. So there was a question about the Ballard Bridge study and whether that's available. I checked in with Diane on this and it has not yet been posted to the SDOT website, but she's going to follow up with the project manager and see if we can get a link posted on this project website. So we'll follow up on that one directly. And then there was also a question about getting the entire survey that's available as a PDF. And that is definitely something that we can make available. So we'll move forward with that as well. So thanks for those questions. All right, on to bike projects. Go ahead, Tom.
Thanks, Jennifer. Again, this is an area that has both some important access in terms of high quality bike and pedestrian trails that move into the district, but also some real challenges in terms of navigating by bike into and around the district. So a number of important opportunities in terms of bike facility improvements. Some of these come from the city's bicycle master plan, from local studies, as well as a number of stakeholder conversations that we've had, including with the Greenways group, who's been active in communication with us. So a few projects where we're looking to add protected bike lanes, and these include a couple key facilities, one being Galer Street and Magnolia Boulevard, which is at the west end of the Magnolia Bridge, West Dravus Street, as well as 15th and Elliott Ave, and a fairly significant north-south project. There are a number of concepts in here that look to make improvements or fill gaps in the trail network. This includes the Ship Canal Trail. There's a concept for an Elliott Bay trail extension, which essentially could follow the general alignment of the new light rail. And I think gleaned some interest in responses to the survey to date, and certainly could provide an alternative to bike facilities on 15th and Elliott. And then some important connectivity opportunities, the Ship Canal Trail connection to Thorndike, for example, a place where there's need for better trail improvements. Another subject that's come up quite extensively is the idea of interim improvements to the Ballard Bridge for bikes and pedestrians, recognizing that the funding for a full replacement or upgrade to that bridge could take some time, and the need is quite immediate. The study will also look at some opportunities that have been identified in studies over the last several years to look at things like potential cantilevered sidewalks or other ways to improve that connection in the interim. And then to Jennifer's previous comment to the question about the Ballard locks, we are exploring, continuing to explore that connection as an important bicycle and pedestrian connection through the district. So just again, as an example project under the bicycle category, I mentioned the new protected bicycle lanes on West Dravus between 20th Ave West and 14th Ave West. Again, as you can see from the picture, this is a fairly high volume place with relatively small sidewalks that make for an uncomfortable condition for cyclists. This project would look to create a fully protected facility in this stretch. I will mention, as I mentioned earlier, that this is one of those places where there is a number of multimodal needs, and so this project may be in some tension or have some other ways to be considered as we look at other needs in this portion of the corridor, including for transit. I also want to mention that while we're walking through these projects, modally, a number of the projects are truly integrated and multimodal. And a good example of where we're looking at an opportunity to improve safety for bicycles and pedestrians, but also doing so with the importance of freight and truck movements in mind. 21st Avenue and Emerson Place is a project that comes up as one we've heard a lot about close calls with trucks and peds and bikes, from the freight community, that they want to be able to move through that more safely. So this is a project where we really have the opportunity to address safety and reliability needs simultaneously. So moving on to transit and freight. And we certainly know and recognize that transit and freight do not have all the same needs. But I think one thing we recognize within the context of the BIRT study era, where there are fairly limited numbers of arterial streets, is that bus transit that is, and freight and goods movement tend to need to operate in the same corridors and on the same facilities. We also know that with future development of the light rail system, there will be quite a bit of change to the bus transit system in this area. Some streets which will have lowered bus volumes due to the new grade separated light rail line, but also some potential plans to restructure new service to terminate at or near light rail stations. So while we don't talk a lot about some of those station-specific needs relative to intermodal bus movements, those are being planned as part of the Sound Transit project, and we're in close coordination with those teams to recognize those needs. So as we look at some of the core opportunities for transit and freight, one of the things that we're looking at is the opportunity for transit and bicycle integration on that West Dravus Street section that we talked about previously. This would be a little bit different look at how we use that cross section, potentially allowing transit and bicycles to operate in some of the same right-of-way, given the physical constraints in that area. Another concept that comes up a couple times in the project list is the idea of using new or existing transit lanes as joint use freight facilities. And how would this work? We've got an example on the next slide of one of the projects, which is the 15th Ave freight and transit lanes between Denny and Market Street. Essentially, this would allow both transit buses and freight and delivery vehicles to use the bus-only lanes on 15th Ave during off-peak times. So it wouldn't allow trucks in those lanes at peak transit times where we have high bus volumes, but while there is more capacity, it would provide an opportunity for trucks to bypass some of the congestion in that corridor.
Tom, as we're moving on to talk about corridors, one question that has come up that I think gets to something you were talking about before in terms of some of the projects potentially being not necessarily in tension with one another, but maybe not able to do everything, is a question about whether the bike project and the transit projects that were mentioned for Dravus, are those about reconfiguring the roadway space that's there versus widening, recognizing, as some folks are pointing out, that Dravus is an important connection, but it's trying to do a lot as well?
That's a good question, and at this point, we're open to both alternatives, but again, recognize the very, very high cost of replacing that bridge facility to add more right-of-way.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'll move you on to corridors, and then we can come back to that as we head into Q&A.
Great. So sort of in the transportation business, when we have very constrained corridors that are serving many needs, as we've shown to be the case here in BIRT, given the relatively limited road network and the pressures on that, one of the things we do look at is how we can improve operations, which for the user means more reliable movement through those corridors, more reliable travel times for people in vehicles, for transit, for freight. And I'll talk about what some of those strategies look like, but the key corridors that we've sort of applied this end-to-end lens for within the study area include 15th Ave West, the north-south direction, Northwest Leary, the Nickerson and Emerson corridor, West Dravus, the Armory Way Bridge, and the Magnolia Bridge connection. And some of the types of strategies that we're looking at within each of those corridors include signal operations. Is there anything we can do with signal timing to improve reliability through those corridors? Use of intelligent transportation systems, be that for general purpose traffic and or for transit. Traffic control, channelization or striping, which in layman's terms essentially means reallocating the right-of-way differently, changing the configuration of lanes and how those are allocated to different vehicles. Access management, which really refers to the number of entry points into a facility. Is there an opportunity to consolidate some of those so we have less interference with roadway operations, and other types of capital improvements. So again, those are some additional corridors that are being looked at with an additional lens as we move through this process. Again, we do want to stress as we go through this that what we're really thriving for in this plan is a set of phased multimodal projects that develop an integrated system that best serve the Ballard and Interbay area over the next 20 plus years. So that will include projects from all the modal elements, and we'll consider those in a phased manner. Again, as I mentioned, many of these projects do have clear relationships to the bridge alternatives, but some don't and may be able to be implemented earlier, irrespective of that timeline required to plan, design, and fund the bridge projects. That is
Great.
a quick summary here, and I'll turn it back to Jennifer.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for running through all of that so quickly. It is a lot of information, and really appreciate everybody's close attention as you are taking a look at what I know are pretty small maps on your screen. I hope you've had a chance to also visit the interactive map that is linked at the bottom of some of these slides. We've tried to answer a few of the questions that have been coming as we've gone, and so we're going to turn it over to question and answer here in just a minute. As we do that, I want to note that there are a couple of questions coming about the last evaluation of the Magnolia Bridge, and so Diane, I believe, is verifying a little bit of information with SDOT's engineers right now, but that it is a bridge. The Magnolia Bridge is one that is inspected every couple of years. And so Diane, maybe as we move into Q&A, I'll invite you to say a little more about that as we get started. So the way that, and again, sorry, I should have flipped to this one again. If you are interested in taking a look at some of the projects specifically, even as we're moving into Q&A, you can use this link here at the bottom. And so it is a tiny URL, and then it's BIRT project map. Each of these projects can be clicked on. You'll get a little bit of information about what the project is. We have a pretty short project description, and you've got the ability to either like that project if you do, or to leave comment, to share your thoughts about it. And you can zoom in and out and really take a look at different areas and the ways that projects relate to each other as well. So as we move into our Q&A, we're going to take about 30 minutes for this. We invite you to, obviously, we want to hear your questions. We want to hear your feedback on any element of what we have talked about today. But a few of the things that you might think about as you are formulating questions would be, which of these projects that, or types of projects even, that Tom talked quickly about, do you feel really best support your travel needs, whether that's to or through the Ballard, Magnolia, and Interbay neighborhoods. We're curious, some folks in the chat mentioned they really like the way that some of the projects are paired. If there are other projects that jump out for you as feeling very connected, we'd love that feedback as well. And then most certainly, if there seems to be anything in this quick review that we missed or that you're not seeing in the online map, certainly would welcome that input too. So the way that we are going to move into the Q&A, and I'm going to take us off of screen share here for a second so that we can see folks as you are jumping in to ask your questions. We are going to manage this with a couple of different tools because there are a lot of us on the phone. So we will ask you to either drop a question or comment in the chat. We'll continue to monitor those, or and preferably to raise your hand. And so the way that you do that is you click on the participants button, which is along the bottom of your screen. That will pop up the participants along the right side of your screen, and you will see the option to raise hand at the very bottom there. And so Jerry and Andres and Chisaki are going to help me keep an eye out for raised hands. If you are on your phone, you can raise your hand by clicking *9. So that's another way to do it. When it is your turn to speak, we will unmute you. You certainly should and can add your video if you would like to. And then please do just quickly introduce yourself as you go. We'll ask folks to try and limit to a single question at a time just so we can hear from as many folks as possible, and then we'll come back to people as we can. So that's how we're going to try and move through this. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so we can see a few more of you. And again, would invite you to raise your hands if you would like to ask a question. Diane, I'm going to actually start with you and ask you if you can add just a little bit more color commentary to the question about the Magnolia Bridge and the information you're getting from your bridge engineers on that front.
So I would like to say that all of the bridges in the city of Seattle are inspected every 2 years. Those that have some structural elements that are in less than optimal condition are inspected annually. And the Magnolia Bridge is part of that category. So our bridge engineers and inspectors are very aware of the Magnolia Bridge and are certainly out there doing their job, making sure that it's safe for your travel.
Great, thank you, Diane. So I think as we're waiting for folks to raise their hands or indicate that they've got a question in the chat, I just want to make sure that we have circled back to a few things. There were a couple of comments earlier during the presentation around sort of seconding the fact that the Emerson crossing is one that is pretty difficult, so appreciate that input as well. And some notes about particular connections one way or another. I think that Tom was able to address the question around what rechannelization means, so apologies for being wonky when I said that the first time. Rechannelization, again, is changing the way that we use the street space that is available, street and sidewalk space that is available. And so sometimes that means that you might, for example, convert a vehicle travel lane into a bus and freight travel lane, or into a bike lane. Other times it's about changing some right-of-way, some parking into a turn lane, for example. So it can be a lot of different ways of reusing that space. So I don't know that I am seeing any raised hands yet, but in case I am missing folks, let's see. Does anyone have, since I'm not seeing any hands or not seeing additional comments in the chat, let me invite other ways of sharing input or asking questions. If you've got a comment or question and you're on video and you want to just wave at me, I'll do my best to see everybody. We do have a lot of you on the line. Are there any comments or questions from folks on the phone or connected?
Like Jan has her hand up.
I'm sorry, who has their hand up?
Jan Solomon.
Great. Oh, okay. Now I am seeing some hands. Sorry, they weren't popping up for me at first. Great. Let's go to Jan Solomon first, and then we will go to Eugene from there. And I think I saw maybe Janice as well. So Jan, I think you're off mute. Please go right ahead and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to have somebody either recap or I must have missed it. What was the possible timeline for either a replacement or repair of the Magnolia Bridge? I know the whole project's supposed to be done by 2042, but if I'm around by then, I certainly won't be driving. So I'm curious.
Good question, Jan. And that is the piece of the project that we tackle next after we have identified this whole series of multimodal projects. But Diane or Tom, do you want to chime in with some thoughts there?
Sure, I can jump in. And just to be clear, what the legislature has asked us for is to develop a funding strategy and a related timeline for a replacement of both the bridges. So that will build on the work, technical work done in both planning studies. We are not expected as part of this study to develop a fully funded package for either of the bridges. So really what it will lay out is the strategies needed to develop the funding plan and some expectation about what the timeline might be and the realistic capacity for various agencies at the state, federal, and local level to develop that funding. The key phases of bridge planning, design, and construction, what the likely cost of each of those is, as typically with these large, very expensive projects, it's common that individual phases of the project are funded separately. So the planning and environmental analysis may be funded separately from the full capital construction and final design. So we'll be looking at that type of funding need. As Jennifer mentioned, that is what we're tackling over the next month. We don't have specifics on that yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Next, we'll go to Eugene Wasserman. Eugene, I'm bringing you off mute now. Trying to bring you off mute. There you go.
Since Sound Transit is deficient in funds to do the Ballard extension at this time, so it might not be completed by the end of the study period in 2044. Are you going to look at a scenario without the light rail in the project?
Great. So are we going to look at a scenario without light rail in the project? I believe the answer to that is no, but Diane and Tom, I'm going to ask you to confirm that.
I will say we are looking at future conditions scenario. In other words, what's the future with no improvements? It's not one of our core planning futures as we've engaged in the study. So I guess the answer to that is generally we're not looking at a no light rail alternative as one of our core planning outcomes, but we will have some baseline information from our models about what that future scenario could look like.
Great, thank you. I have Janice next, and then
Can
we'll
I
go
get
to
that briefly?
I'm sorry, say again?
I mean, can I respond to that, or?
Do you have another question?
No, respond to his comment. Or we're just doing questions?
Sure, if you want to respond to that, please.
I think at this point, it looks like they may not have the funding to get it done. So I don't find that this to be a realistic study if you don't consider that as one of the alternatives, since that's a major transportation mode. It's something we all need to see what it would be without the project being done in time. I mean, I'm not saying it's to be obstinate, but it doesn't look, they're really short a lot of money, and they're not going to develop plans till next year. But it'd be nice for the city to know what the implications of that might be.
Great. Thank you for that, Eugene. It's a good reminder too that as we have our next interagency team meeting, which will be happening in the mid part of August, I think we
Very
do
good.
need to have some of that conversation with our partners. So thank you for that.
I'm kind of done listening.
I had Janice next. Hang on one second, Janice. I'm going to unmute you. There you go.
Hi, I'm Janice Traven, a Magnolia resident. I want to, for the team that doesn't already know this, I am happy to offer my institutional memory about the Magnolia Bridge. I've been involved with the community and with the bridge replacement since the original design advisory group. So there's a lot of stuff that's gone on that you don't need to reinvent the wheel about. And I would like to say that one of the reasons that the Magnolia community is so solidly in favor of the one-to-one replacement isn't just that we like the view, but because we've been through, my husband is using power tools. So let me sorry about that. That's life. Anyway, we've been through the closure of the bridge before, and some things that, as a suggestion to expand what you're looking at with Magnolia is right now your project area only goes as far west as 28th West. In looking at some of the map alternatives, it doesn't seem that topography has been taken into account in some of the alternatives. I started to make some comments on that, and I will continue to, but perhaps because of COVID, you haven't been out to actually see some of these places. You're just looking at a map, and Magnolia isn't really like that. There are a lot of places where you can't get there from here, and it doesn't, what may make sense on a map doesn't make sense in real life. The other thing that I would like the group to take into account, and this is has become very real to those of us who live on the Magnolia Peninsula, is that unlike the West Seattle Peninsula, and we do feel their pain, we don't have water access. We don't have a way off other than Emerson, Dravus, and the Magnolia Bridge. And the notion that we would have something where most of the people live in the southern part of Magnolia, and to have to schlep up to Thorndike to Armory Way to get off just adds so much time. And we don't have any other alternatives. So the one-to-one replacement is favored for many reasons, including it makes travel time in Magnolia, it gives us more time to be at home with our families, COVID notwithstanding. So anyway.
Power tools and all, right?
Power tools. Yeah,
Thank you.
So anyway, I mean, really look at beyond 28th West and ask questions. I think the Magnolia community is happy to help, like what these streets are actually like.
Great. Thank you for that, Janice. Thanks for thinking about the broadening of the study area as well. And we are, I mean, it is true, we are in a challenging time in terms of everybody being able to have access, but we are fortunate that we've got a local project team and have been able to be out and about and understanding. It's different when you live there. We know that and appreciate the willingness to offer input and insight. So I've got a couple of folks lined up, and then also see that Councilmember Strauss has joined us. So let me just say who's next, and then I'm going to turn it over to the council member for just a second. I've got Oscar Sitar and then Ryan DeRamo. Is that right, Ryan? Okay, great. But before I go to the two of you, I'm just going to welcome Councilmember Dan Strauss. And Councilmember, if you'd like to say anything to the group, I'm sure folks would love to hear from you. So welcome. And once we're unmuting you, there you go.
Thank you, Jennifer. See a lot of really great faces on this call. Here, Eugene, Janice, John, see Ray here, Marnie Heffron, Mark Ostro, Jacob Thorpe, Chris Arkills, Casey Gifford. There's just some really great folks that are engaged in this work. I want to come back to where this work began from, which was in part regarding the Magnolia Bridge. The Ballard Interbay Regional Corridor is the third most used north-south corridor behind SR 99 and I-5. Really, it begins at 145th and I-5 and ends at Edgar Martinez Way and I-5, which encompasses many legislative districts, and we'll get to why that's important in just a little bit. So 32nd, 46th, 36th, and 43rd legislative districts. When the Ballard Interbay Regional Corridor work came together over almost a year and a half ago, we worked with stakeholders, with the Port, Sound Transit, King County, the City of Seattle, looks like I might be
There you go.
muted.
You're okay.
Yep, can you still hear me all right?
Yep.
Great. And elected officials from each level of government, because there are many overlaying levels of government within the Interbay Regional Corridor. This corridor has a very narrow right-of-way with increasing pressure from density in northern locations, Ballard, and north of there, including increasing amenities within Interbay. We've seen the redevelopment of the new, I guess it's not new any longer, but the supermarket, and we see Expedia's transition there, having created increasing pressure. And in the future with the Armory redevelopment, there is going to be a lot of land that it will be changing uses. Through this narrow corridor, it's important that we're able to preserve the ability of goods and freight to move freely so that freight has the ability to have predictable schedules, as well as transit, which is moving the freight of people. This corridor also includes the need to create last mile for goods delivery to whether it's GM nameplate or into the industrial uses in that area, as well as we need to still be able to preserve the ability for everyday travel to move north and south and east and west. The reason that the Ballard Interbay Regional Corridor Transportation Corridor came together is because there are a number of different transportation projects in this area that need funding. So that's the Magnolia Bridge, the Ballard Bridge, the Dravus Overpass. Sound Transit will be coming to the area. We need to ensure that transit and freight have lanes to get through. We need to ensure that port access to Pier 90 and Fisherman's Terminal is easy and intuitive to use. And then we're also seeing that the BNSF Railway Bridge over the Ship Canal and the locks will need investments in the future. One of the things in particular that Janice was just talking about, the one-for-one replacement of the Magnolia Bridge, is this project on its own is not attractive for federal or state funding because of the level of service that it receives. When the Magnolia Bridge was originally built, it was a shared cost between the city, a local improvement district in Magnolia, and BNSF Railways. So even when it was originally created, it was not from a single source of funding. By packaging all of these projects that I just spoke about, the Magnolia Bridge, Ballard Bridge, transit lanes, the Dravus Overpass, when we package these projects together in this Ballard Interbay Regional Transportation Corridor, it allows us to meet the criteria needed to receive federal funding and state funding. State Representative Tarleton brought us $1 million from the state to continue the work that you're doing right now so that we're able to package these projects and so that we are ready for the next state transportation package and that we're ready to send these projects to, for federal funding grants. So I just wanted to step in and say thank you for continuing this work. I worked as the staff for Councilmember Sally Bagshaw to organize the original 3 sets of these meetings, and I'm committed to continuing this work. We need to identify the projects and the needs of our community with a 20-year view so that we're able to plan for the future. We need to package these projects together to receive the state and federal funding, and I want to thank SDOT for your continued work to package these projects. I am remaining committed to seeing this work through. I'm already late for another meeting, but I could take 1 or 2 questions if you would like, Jennifer.
Sure. Before we go back to our regular lineup of questions, does anybody have a question for the council member? We appreciate you being open to taking any of those. Looks like you may be off the, Ryan, is your question one that would be good for the council member to respond to? Okay, great. Then we'll bump you up in the queue, and council member not quite, we'll let you off the hook in just a second. But Ryan, please go ahead. Let me bring you off mute. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the question, and I'll be brief considering your time. You talk about interdisciplinary meetings regarding this bridge and this whole project in general, considering it impacts the whole city. There's currently 30 urban villages in the entire city of Seattle, and Magnolia has none of them. And considering the low usage of the bridge currently and sort of the complicated transportation they already have planned, is there a way to streamline that by starting with trading an urban village upzone of, call it 300 acres? You could triple the population of Magnolia. You could build in that transit ridership, and you can build in that funding tax base that you were talking about in order to get the project completed under cost. Thanks, that's it.
That's a great question. What I'm focused on right now is how we can package these projects together so that we're able to receive state and federal funding, because the city, the county, the port can't do this alone. You know, what's really important for me to be thinking about when we're looking at especially the Magnolia Bridge replacement is that we're allowing for easy and intuitive access to the port, to Smith Cove Park, and to the emerging growth opportunities that are at the Armory site and throughout. I think that it is important that when we are looking at the Magnolia Bridge, we're also looking at the Ballard Bridge, which has a much higher level of service. And so before I get into the land use in Magnolia, I would definitely want to confer with the District 7 council member.
Great.
So,
Thank you,
Jennifer.
Councilmember. Thanks for making time to join us. It's good to see you, and we appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, great to see you. Great to see you, John, Eugene, Marnie, Mark, Jacob, Chris, Casey. Great to see you all. And anyone else that I may have missed, look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
Great, thank you. And Ryan, thanks for that question. We've got Oscar Sitar, and apologies for any mispronunciation, as our next question asker. And as we're bringing you off mute, I also want to just acknowledge that I do see a couple of questions that are in the chat, and we're going to weave those into the conversation next. So Oscar Sitar, are you there? I'm unmuting you.
I just unmuted. Thank you.
Great.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your time. Thank you for the time the project team put in so far. I understand it's a very complex project, obviously, multifaceted project. I'm a resident of South Magnolia, and a quick comment and a quick question, please. Number one, the comment. I'm sure most of you are aware that the differences between the Dravus corridor and Magnolia Bridge, and the Magnolia Bridge, the reason why it's so popular and kind of on the front of Magnolia residents' mind is because the ease at which it moves the traffic in and out of Magnolia. As you compare it to the Dravus corridor, it is significantly faster. My number one comment is that I hope the city and the project team considers maintaining that expediency of moving the traffic in and out of Magnolia as compared to the Dravus corridor. So fewer lights, fewer stop signs, and so on. The actual question is, as it relates to the replacement versus the new location for the Magnolia Bridge, as is replacement or the new location. Again, not being extremely familiar with the project yet, what are the cons and pros, so to speak, of if we can cover now, or if you guys can point me to the place I can read about this, of the new location versus replacement of the bridge?
Great question.
And that's the
Thank
question.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Diane, is that something that you want to answer now, or is it better to connect with one of the bridge engineers to talk through that in more detail? Diane, let me unmute you here. You might have to do it yourself, Diane.
I'm unmuted.
There we go.
Hi, thank you for that question. Maybe one of our staff can put the Magnolia Bridge study link in the chat so that Oscar can access that. But thank you. So there are a number of different criteria that were used to evaluate the Magnolia Bridge, and they will be found in the study, and they range from cost to community preference and engineering and design and all kinds of criteria, but you will find the full chart and explanation for the well, there were 4 options initially, but there were 2 that rose to the top. One was the one-to-one replacement, and the other one is called Alternative 1, which takes you down Armory Way. And you will find all that information in the study.
Thank you, Diane. And Chisaki did just post that link in the chat, so hopefully that's easy for everybody to access. So just recognizing that we are coming to the end of our time, I want to just quickly reflect a couple of questions that were asked above. So there was a question about how climate analysis is being, or how climate impacts are being factored in, and how this work relates to the city's climate action plan. And Tom, I know you mentioned that really quickly when you were talking about the goals and the evaluation criteria, but do you want to say another word about that since it's come up again?
Sure, and we are quite familiar with the city's climate plan. We worked on the transportation element of that, so understand the targets that have been set. We are at this point looking at, as part of our planning level analysis, a few things, one of which includes the effect on vehicle miles traveled from different projects or sets of corridor management strategies. At this level of planning, that would typically be one of the kind of core metrics that would help us to understand the benefits or impacts various projects have on carbon emissions and climate impacts. So we are looking at that. Again, we're not at a high phase of design for any of these projects, but we do have some qualitative criteria that look at things like urban heat island impact, benefits of reducing the amount of impervious surface through landscaping or other treatment. So we are looking at that in a couple ways through the analysis. So thanks for that question.
Great, thank you, Tom. And then Diane, there was a question that came about the Magnolia Bridge and whether there's any risk of an immediate shutdown for that bridge. And I think you've been able to check in with folks on that as well.
Right, and I want to say that if, in terms of any bridge being at risk for immediate shutdown, if, for example, we were to have an earthquake this afternoon, then there would be that risk, right? So all I can speak to is the information we have today and the conditions we have today. But at this point, there is no conversation whatsoever about Magnolia Bridge being at a risk for shutdown. And the bridge engineers have all this whole stabilization structure in place that prevents that from happening.
Great, thank you, Diane. We have had a couple of additional questions come through email. The team is letting me know. I do want to just pause the Q&A for a quick second, make sure that we talk about what the next steps are very quickly. So those of you that need to head out can do that. And then we can stay for just a few more minutes and answer these final questions that have come. So Diane, do you want to just talk quickly about next steps here? And then we can go back and try and hit on a couple of these additional questions.
You bet. So we are finishing up the cost benefits analysis for social and economic impacts of the bridges. And this includes travel time, operating and build costs, safety, housing and job accessibility, property values as requested by some folks in the Magnolia Community Council, and market desirability. We are going to select recommended projects to go into the report, and we're going to create a phased implementation plan for the bridges per the legislation. We will be hosting another meeting next week. So for if you have friends who might be interested, they can come join us on Thursday evening. The survey will continue to be up until August 10th. We will be meeting then with our interagency team, going over projects for review, and we will be back with all of you in October. Anyone who has joined this, we have your email address, and we will be sending you notices for when we have the draft product. And I thank you all for coming and joining us. I thank the people who have who are familiar with this project, and in particular people who are just getting to know about it today. So take care. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane. And again, thank you, everybody. We will call this the official close of the meeting, and then I think, can hang on for just a couple more minutes and address any outstanding questions that there might be. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Diane and Tom, for your presentations. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. And we will hold tight for just a second here. Okay. So I actually, Diane, I think that the individual who asked the questions via email has left, and so I don't want to respond to those without the benefit of him being able to hear the responses. So I think I would suggest that we follow up via email with those. I will just read them for the good of the group since this is recorded, and then we'll note that we will follow up. So there were questions around where is rail reflected in the movement of freight in the plan, how we're applying an equity lens to the projects, especially in cases when projects were developed maybe before equity was a core focus in all of the city's planning efforts, and how are we factoring in the 1998 BINMIC plan and the 1985 short fill agreement on the list of reviewed documents. I think for those, they're a little bit outside of our 20-year plan review life cycle, but we can respond to those directly. So just wanted to let everybody know we did have a request to post the survey again, and that has been posted in the chat. So there are two different ways to get into the survey: the tiny URL BIRT survey, and then also you can go to BIRT projects as well. Great. All right. Oh, hi, Ray. Ray was the person who asked those three questions, and Ray is indeed still here. Ray, I didn't see you. It's good to have you here. We just didn't want to answer your questions without you being in the audience. So, Diane, would you want to tackle those questions or to start with the questions related to rail, related to freight movement, those older plan documents, and then we can talk a little bit about how we're applying an equity lens in our analysis.
Yes, I could. Tom, do you want to take that question? Just because I only heard, you would need to repeat it for me because
no problem. No problem.
Via email. So
okay, no problem. So the first question was just how are we reflecting rail when it comes to freight movement within the plan? And tied to that, I think, are questions about a couple of older planning documents, 1998 and 1985, and how we're factoring those in. And then I think the larger question related to our use of an equity lens in evaluation. So Tom, any thoughts on the rail as part of the freight discussion?
Yeah, our analysis is really focused on the roadway network and impacts in terms of connectivity of trucks to rail. We're certainly not considering any major changes to the rail facilities. We know those are critical and will remain in place. So I think that's the short answer on that one.
Great. And then maybe just as we wrap up, we can just talk about how we're applying an equity lens in project evaluation and then follow up from there.
Great. So we actually have another firm that's part of the team that is not here today, but is doing some important work looking at both the social and racial justice elements of this project. That firm's been quite involved in the mayor's industrial and maritime strategy and has been engaged closely with a number of the industrial and maritime employers. So they are looking in a good amount of detail at how the different transportation projects and system performance impact workers, people of color who work in the district, the number of lower income, lower wage workers who commute in and out of the district. And they're applying a pretty rigorous benefit cost analysis to that. So actually looking at some of the quantified or monetized social costs of different projects and alternatives. So that work is ongoing and feeding into our analysis.
And I'd like to add one thing, which is
Please.
Usually in an equity approach, we do a lot of outreach and like meeting people where they are and going to places. And right now, because of COVID, people aren't gathering and we're not going to places. So we have been a little bit hampered in terms of the degree of one-to-one communication that we would like to have with people of color and some of the workers down in the frozen foods and different other industries in the bin mic. So I would say that we are making every effort we can and that it is not as optimal as we would have hoped if it had not been a COVID period of time.
Great, thank you for that, Diane. And again, thank you all for joining us today, for participating. If you have additional comments and questions, you can send those through the project website, provide them through the survey. We do have a handful of follow-up items for the team, including developing a PDF or a static version of the survey, and we'll get that both posted on the website and then out to folks via email as well. So again, thank you all so much. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we will look forward to connecting with you again soon. Take care, everybody.